And we are live.
There we are. Greetings, fellow nerds. Welcome to another episode of Between Two Nerds, where we talk with prominent guests about all aspects of the networking industry, from protocols old and new to industry trends and drivers to up-and-coming technologies, and as always, things you should know to further your career. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Doing great.
We were just before this thing started. We were just kind of giving you a hard time about the chin growth there. It looks good. I think we're all,
yeah. I'm seeing out from you and Scott. So
I was just going to say, yeah, you're just sort of fitting the requirements for being on here now.
And my case, I just got my hair. It just
there you go. It sort of draws in there and comes out here. Is that what it's?
That's what I understand. Absolutely.
But you did something better. You managed to keep it in both places.
Yes. So today we've got a special guest. We actually have two guests. One is running a little bit late because of another meeting. He should be here in a moment. But we've got Scott Robohn with the Network Automation Forum. Chris Grundemann will also be joining us. Probably in just a minute or so. But speak of the devil, Chris,
perfect entry. That's right.
See, I couldn't remember, Chris, whether you had chin hair or not, but we were
indeed.
We're
all equipped.
Jeff has
something about
sprouted chin hair, so now we're just we're a fraternity of real men here,
fully bearded. Yeah.
Yeah,
Jeff, that's the only one not wearing glasses, so you're the youngest.
So how can I be between two nerds when one of them isn't wearing glasses? I don't understand.
Right. Well, hey, what can I say? It's there. How's that?
There we go.
So, anyway, Scott and Chris have both been on the show before, actually separately. Last year, when we were first promoting the very first AutoCon, AutoCon 0, which took place right here in Denver, you guys sort of correct me if I misstate any of this, but really the theme at the time was see, my brain just went blank, but it was. I think it's more the theme of the Network Automation Forum than a specific AutoCon. But basically, what is the problem with network automation? Why isn't everyone doing it by now?
Well, to put it in a fine point, why haven't we seen the full adoption of network automation?
There you go. Yet? That's what I was trying to dredge up out of my thick skull.
It was there. It was there swimming around.
It was there, just right below the surface. But now we just finished AutoCon 2. Again here in Denver. Had AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam, AutoCon 3, which is it for sure? It's going to be in Prague.
That's right.
We are locked in. Last full week of May 2025. So,
well, what I noticed out of all of this is just sort of a peripheral observer and an attendee is that even AutoCon 0, for a very first event, the attendance and the interest was just enormous. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that event sold out. And there was a lot of conversation of people saying, how do I get tickets to this? I know that was happening with AutoCon 2. But is it fair to say that AutoCon 2 is about twice the size of AutoCon 0?
Not quite twice. So we had about 350 folks show up for AutoCon 0. And you're right. We were blown away anyway at the level of enthusiasm and excitement around it, for sure, which is definitely what inspired us to keep going. And then AutoCon 1, the second event, as you said, in Amsterdam in May, we capped out a little over 400 people, which was the capacity of the hotel. It was a little tight, to be honest. And then we had planned it. We added capacity for Denver for AutoCon 2. And so we had room for 500 folks. And again, we had a little over that show up again. So we sold out again. And for AutoCon 2, what was different is the sponsor slots sold out as well. We ran out of space to add more sponsors. So there's definitely excitement kind of on all sides of the table around this topic of network automation.
Yeah. And as far as the event itself, I know that, from zero, which was just sort of, as you would expect, I don't want to say a tentative event, but it was primarily presentations. And
first one out of the gate, testing what's of interest and for what was obvious to us even from AutoCon 0, we picked a bogey of 200. We said if we get 200 people, we'll call that a success. Yeah. And again, 350 of our best friends showed up. And to see that steady growth very organically, we do a lot of getting the word out via our email list, via LinkedIn, via our Slack. Word has just spread very, very steadily and normally. We haven't had to do anything crazy, but we've done some good things, largely thanks to Chris and his partners, I4 Design, and just making things look really good. The word's gotten out there very well.
Well, I think what the huge message is based on how successful it was so quickly and with so many people, is that there is a huge interest in network automation. I mean, just the fact that if you consider everybody that's interested but couldn't get here, just based on who was here and all the contributions that everybody made and all the questions everybody had, and having workshops this time, which was a big demand of, I know that, for a fact, that was a new thing with AutoCon 2. Did you have workshops I missed AutoCon 1, so
we did. So at AutoCon 1, we added the workshops. That was kind of the brainchild of Scott and some folks. And AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam, we had basically one track of workshops. So there was, I think we had something like 60 people come for the workshops, and it was 2 days, and everybody went through the same track. And then that expanded again for AutoCon 2, where we actually had 4 separate workshops during 4 separate time slots. So it was AM and PM, Monday and Tuesday, 16 options, and everyone kind of chose their own adventure through that. So I'm hesitating to say it wasn't 4 tracks. It was more than that, because you could kind of do whatever you wanted within those 16 options. So you made 4 choices of 4 different options and kind of moved through. And I got a huge response on that as well. I think a couple of things that folks talked about, to me anyway, in person on the workshops was, something I hadn't even thought about, which is that folks at work don't get time to play with some of this stuff, right? If you're at especially a larger company, there's a whole RFP process and POC process, and you've got, there's a lot of hoops to jump through in order to get your hands on some of these tools and tech, or even just get the resources to spin up the open source stuff sometimes. And so being able to come and have a guided, hands-on experience with that was just, really great for some people. And then of course, it's a learning opportunity as well, just in general, right? To just see some things you haven't seen before, or learn some things, some techniques and things. So lots of different avenues for the workshops to help people, I think.
And part, in addition to that, we had a variety of people step up to deliver workshop material. Some were very company focused. Some were people with ideas that just wanted to present on topics that they found interesting. And it was, we didn't tie anything to sponsorship or anything like that. And I was just super pleasantly surprised with all the feedback and how everything was really well received. Some workshops did better than others. I won't reveal any of that information on this live stream today, but they were all really good, or really, really good. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. And from your experience, what did you see in terms of the proportion between people that were coming to workshops just saying, I just want to know the basics. I need to get enough Python. I need to get enough Ansible or whatever under my belt to be able to begin automating things in my own network, as opposed to people that sort of said, I've got all those basics in my mind. I just need to know how to glue those together into, an applicable automation program.
There's a good mix. I think it's the right question. There's a good mix. One of the things I heard from several of the workshop proctors, right, the folks who put on the workshops, was I was a little worried this was going to be too basic. And what I realized was it needed to be more basic.
Really?
There's definitely a high percentage of folks who are, they know that network automation is something that's going to help them, help their organization, but they haven't had any exposure to it. And so even something as simple as like sharing SSH keys was, and this wasn't definitely, the majority, but there's some of the folks who were in these groups didn't even understand how to, create an SSH key in order to get access to the labs, right? And so there was some even underneath that, hey, I just want the Python basics. It's I need to learn how to work with Git and work with just code in general, and how do I get access to jump boxes and some things that not every network engineer does. And so, but at the same time, there's definitely people who were, at the other end of the spectrum, who are really looking for ideas to tweak and tune their existing automation practice.
Chris, would be correct to assume that most people were looking into configuration rather than telemetry and kind of more advanced topics.
Well, there were some telemetry and observability focused workshops. So there was a wide variety of things covered. I would say probably the most common, top level assessment of every workshop was, was it too advanced or not advanced enough? And I think the majority of responses were it was just right. So I think there was a balancing out of, advanced versus basic material. We did ask every workshop provider to indicate, as this introductory, intermediate, advanced, and so forth. Most common topic, let's see if you can guess. Jeff, what do you think the most common workshop topic was?
Ansible configuration, I would assume, but
it's a good guess, but not quite.
Oh man.
I'll save you the. I'll save you the.
Popped in my head. I can't even.
Source of truth. Source of truth.
Oh, okay.
One of my most favorite topics.
In one form or another, there were probably 4 workshops that were all centered on source of truth issues, approaches. So that was really interesting and not that surprising in hindsight, but that was yeah. Go ahead.
Who would have guessed that network engineers would get excited about documentation?
Not just documentation. This is an existential,
documentation
source.
2.0.
Yeah. Documentation infinity.
Mm-hmm.
What is my network supposed to look like?
Well, that's really, it's such a profound, in one way, a single source of truth. It's like, every marketing slide you see on any network automation tool, the SSOT is all over it. But, but at the same time, it's a profound question of, well, what does that really mean? And what it's reflecting behind there is recognition of, every object in your network, and objects within objects is a source of truth. And how do you how do you consolidate all that into, hey, I'm going to coin a phrase, a single source of truth.
Right.
So I think people kind of came to realization that single source of truth is mandatory for working solution, right?
Yeah.
So next question would be probably modeling. How do you model what it is?
Mm-hmm. So that was also covered by at least 1, maybe 2 workshops where digital twin is the common vernacular for modeling. And that's really interesting to me because I actually came into networking from an academic background in modeling and simulation.
Mhm.
And for the first 10 years of my career in networking, I was always like, why don't we do more modeling? And that's because nobody trusted the hardware that networks were made of, because failure conditions matter, and weird behavior and different BGP stack implementations, et cetera. People don't trust the models, or at least 30 years ago, there wasn't trust in modeling. But now that things are becoming better understood and more common and easier to set up virtual labs with essentially modeling entities, it's not called modeling per se, but it's becoming much more common and a much more interesting exercise.
I would decouple digital twin, which is kind of instantiation of your modeling from modeling itself, right? How do you model the network? How do you compare different values in your model? Did you have kind of discussion going in depth? Because it's a really, really complex and important topic.
It is a complex topic. I think there is some conversation around that for sure at AutoCon and on the NAF Slack in general. Right now, there's actually a working group that kind of spontaneously formed after out of the last few events within the Slack channel and beyond, that's focused on trying to. Well, there's kind of two efforts going on. One is a glossary of terms, which we're calling the Autonomicon, which is just going to be a lexicon of words about automation. But then there's been even more excitement around this idea of kind of creating a standardized framework that we can all kind of look at. Now, what's interesting there, going back to kind of the source of truth discussion a little bit, is that, I think largely, well, I agree with you, Jeff, that a source of truth is needed, for the basis of kind of modern network automation orchestration. The idea of a single source of truth has been fairly ephemeral, to Jeff Doyle's point, right? That this is something that almost is just like a architecture idea. It's like the single pane of glass. It's not a real thing. You don't actually want it. And so that group anyway has started talking about data stores instead of sources of truth, just to kind of distance themselves a little bit. And that data stores is definitely plural, right? Because there's one point of contention within the community is the CMDB my source of truth, or is the network my source of truth, right? And you can get some pretty passionate arguments on both sides of that. The folks who point to the network say, well, that's what's actually going on, right? Whether you like it or not, the configurations on the devices in the network is the actual truth of what's actually happening. And then this, this centralized database, whether it's configuration management database or whatever you want to call it, there is your intended state. And so what we've kind of come to the conclusion, I think, as a community, somewhat, it's early days, is that they're both data stores, right? It's all data, and that what you really need to do is understand what data lives where, and then how do you apply logic to it to get the actions you want. So kind of going back to nuts and bolts of kind of system design and looking at automation outside of the tools and just saying, okay, how does network operations work? Great. How do we take that and then automate it once we kind of understand the framework and the nuts and bolts?
So
there's a great principle, from early IETF days that has really become a reality for what we're doing in NAF. And it's just rough consensus and running code. Like, we're not trying to create standards per se, but if you get enough people together with enough of the right experience who are interested in addressing issues like Chris just called out, you can come to at least a rough consensus. And so that leads into more productive conversations. What do you mean source of truth? What do you mean model of my network? And so forth. And part of what Chris and I are trying to do is be that place where those conversations can happen. Be the forum, be the watering hole, be the pub. I like pubs this week for some reason, Chris. No matter how warm the beer is or not.
I'm still a fan of campfire, but
campfire, that works. I can smell the campfire now. But like, part of, I think, what's super gratifying to both of us is, as this has grown, these affinity groups and topics are starting to be addressed without Chris and I forcing anything. We're here to facilitate it. We'll maintain the Slack. We'll bring people together for events. We'll do stuff in between to facilitate the conversation, but the community's got to participate and be the ones that move the ball forward.
Guys, do you see yourself as kind of easier forum to consume, to participate than ITF, but that could be connected? So a few examples, there's 10 plus years work on network modeling. So all the young work, all the ACTN and, this multi-layer architectures on top, that bunch of data stores, to your point, right? There's new working group called NMOP that is specifically focusing on operation automation. That's being driven by people like Thomas Graf and others who are very passionate and actually making things work. They're not only talking about, they're actually implementing what they're talking about, right? So are we trying to connect it to very different universes?
So you couldn't have asked a better question, Jeff. So as a matter of fact, I believe IAB has gone and done some pre-workshop activities before this December NEMOPS discussion that just happened. And one of them happened at NAF. And Mahesh J, I'm blanking on Mahesh's last name.
I can't say it.
If I work hard enough, so Mahesh ran the one at NAF. There was also one at NANOG in Toronto in October. And so we see, kind of this natural aggregation of IETF trying to bring data together, and we're happy to help. We have a different mission, right? We're here to put a highlight on, letting people come together and discuss and bringing their user stories together. If there's a way that can easily provide input into this whole, next generation management and operations discussion, of course we want to help. Two birds, one stone. Apologies to bird lovers out there.
Well, Scott, you and I were chatting a little bit about just casually about NANOG before the show started. Have you guys presented anything at NANOG on findings of from AutoCon and things like that? Chris, I know you did
as individuals. Yeah. I'll let Chris speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the network automation survey that I put together the last 2 years in a row now, kind of picking up the torch from Damien and some others who had done it for a couple of years before that. The first one I did, I presented the results of that survey at NANOG because we didn't exist. AutoCon didn't exist quite yet. And so the second year survey I presented at NAF. I think though that's a great idea. Is potentially. I don't want to commit to anything on the fly here, but I do like the idea of Scott or I or someone from the community kind of wrapping up some of these emerging best practices and bringing that back to NANOG. I think that's a great idea. And it's definitely happening, I think, in other fora. I think people are definitely, as Scott said, we're not trying to set any standards. I don't think anyone in the NAF community is, trying to use NAF as a standards organization, but these best practices are bubbling up. And I think those can, one, inform what's going on at the IETF and probably be informed by what's capable from the protocols coming out of the IETF. But then also taking those to other operator forums, more general operator forums, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because they all accept BCPs, being IETF, being RIPE, NANOG doesn't really have track for documents, but especially IETF and RIPE like meetings where you can publish BCPs, I think that would be amazing.
We're totally open to that, and here's where AS confederations are a paradigm for life, right? There's a reason for autonomous systems being autonomous, right? You can do one thing over here and another thing over here, but we have ways to communicate and cooperate. We're not trying to take over anything from any other entity. We feel like we're really adding to the community with that focus on network automation. We feel like there's been great response. And of course, that is adjacent to other important areas in the work that other organizations are doing.
And I entirely agree with what you said. And what I see it is just the opposite. Not that NAF is trying to take anything away from any other organization, but that you are becoming kind of a pivot point for automation. So the findings you're taking, would certainly be valuable to the IETF in terms of, standards are developed around automation, and you're certainly a point of interest for operator groups like NANOG. I wonder, I'm sure that the word is well out there now, but how much interest could there be from more generalized operator groups like NANOG in knowing that that forums like AutoCon exist?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the reasons we're very grateful for being on with you today. Even though
that's
word
one of the reasons I asked you on today.
Yeah, word has spread very well.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised. Like I had 2 other calls today with people that just said, "Yeah, I just stumbled onto information about Network Automation Forum and talk to me about it."
Yeah.
And I'm trying to fill sponsorship slots, so I'm happy to talk to anyone. But so it's a big world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though Chris has a great personal network, and I do, and people who are in the community are adding to it, there's miles to go before we sleep. And please help get the message out there, right? We want this to go as far and as wide as people are interested in doing.
Well, Chris, you mentioned it. I mentioned it briefly. You did at this past AutoCon, you did a keynote on the automation survey.
Yeah.
And you've done that before. In fact, we had you on this show to talk specifically about the automation survey, I think right before AutoCon 0.
Yeah.
But what do you see changing from that? Obviously, I'm not asking you to pull out the entire presentation, but just as far as the high points, what have you learned that has changed over the last year?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I think was really interesting about the 2024 survey versus the 2023 survey was I realized the need to ask directly what people's challenges were with network automation. Rather than trying to just read between the lines and read the tea leaves, I just, on the 2024 survey, we asked specifically, what is, the number one challenge to adopting network automation more fully in your organization? And we only allowed people to choose one. And what came out of that is, which I think we kind of had tacitly understood, especially after attending AutoCon 0 and AutoCon 1 and talking to people. I already kind of knew this, but seeing it in black and white was really helpful to me anyway, was that the technical challenges are not the biggest challenge in almost any case. Now, there are technical challenges. We need smart engineers working on these things to get this stuff to work. But even getting the smart engineers to work on it is a challenge because there's a skills gap out there for sure. Skills was a lot of people's number one challenge, was just not having the right skills, either themselves or on their teams. The organizational structure is another challenge, right? And that's one of the things we've seen. I think the corollaries to DevOps is interesting. I don't think there's a perfect corollary there, but I do think that this idea of embedding developers and operations together and having them work together is needed. And with networking, that's just not the case almost anywhere today, right? There are not, the networkers kind of work in a different building, in a different wing, in the basement, in a lot of cases, right? It's totally separate off there with the security folks, right? Whereas the systems and servers and storage folks have been more integrated into the organizations in most cases. So the organizational challenges are part of it. Cultural as well. Which goes both ways, right? And there's a lot to be wound up in that. We've done some posts on that on the NAF blog as well, around kind of the cultural challenge of network automation and the fact that this, potentially challenges the identity of network engineers in some ways, because the skills they have are not all that's needed anymore, maybe. And then and personality as well, right? So these kind of just soft skill things, business side things, these are some of the biggest challenges to network automation adoption, which again, when you sit and think about it and you talk to a lot of folks, that becomes clear. But having it in the survey in black and white, I think has helped at least me to kind of really wrap my head around that.
How do you mean personality?
Yeah. So, and I kind of stole the lead with the cultural side, because I think there are parallels between these things. But to me, one of the biggest personality challenges is, well, there's two pieces to this, right? But I think a lot of it wraps up to, I compare it a lot to the second industrial revolution. And then maybe this sounds wild, but there was this point, right, where in like the late 1800s, as we started moving from artisanal craftspeople to manufactured goods. And the end result was amazing, right? Because in the beginning of the 1800s, whether you were making a sewing machine or a rifle or whatever it was, every single piece and part was manufactured so poorly that someone had to sit there with a file and a chisel and a saw or whatever and shape these pieces to get them to fit together. And so when they put together a sewing machine, that one, and they're done with that, and then they build another one. If you take those two sewing machines and you take them apart and you swap the parts around, you can't rebuild the sewing machine because they were like literally custom fit to make one machine. And the same thing was true with rifles, which meant that you couldn't go out in the field and service rifles. It was really, really hard. Like if a one part broke on the rifle, you throw it away because you can't replace that part without somebody sitting there and tailoring that piece to fit again. And these craftsmen studied their whole lives and worked their whole lives to develop these skills to do this. And then what happened is that second industrial revolution made manufacturing processes better so that we could manufacture parts in a way that you could actually put together 3 or 4 sewing machines, take them all apart, swap the parts, put them back together, and they still work. But what that did is the person who had spent the last 20 years filing down, sewing needles, felt a little out of place. And I think, whether it's just that, they're a little sad about the old days, or they don't want to change, or they, there's all kinds of things that well up then in your personality when you see this challenge to how you've been making a living for so long. And I think that's happening to some degree. I think there are network engineers who are like, automation, no. I got my CCIE. I know how to do the CLI really fast, and anything that's going to make that less important, I don't know that I love.
Yeah.
And
very right observation. Yes.
Well, and so now advance that to not just the current environment, but where we've been in all of our careers in networking and IT in general, right? You asked for this life of disruption, maybe not consciously, but you did, right? So quit your whining and embrace it, right? Because you saw this new shiny object called IP addressing and T1s, and you thought that was cool. And that was disruptive, for the folks who were X.25 and frame relay, folks at the time. And we've, you can easily see the parallels in computing, moving from punch cards and assembly to COBOL to Fortran to C and Rust and Go. And the hardware developments over time that have really disrupted just the computing arena. For the network engineer, the time is over for it's not just subnets and spanning tree anymore, right? You need to know some Linux. You probably need to know Git. You probably need to know a little bit about at least one of the major cloud platforms. And that's just a start, to be that, what does the next gen network engineer need to look like today? So, and we, by selection, right, we have people that are interested in that. People aren't really showing up to AutoCon events who hate automation. Right. They're not speaking up if they do.
Yeah. Well, I've often said that if you have a poor attention span, this is the industry to be in, because
squirrel.
nothing lasts very long here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, not to take us too far off on a tangent here, but I think it's something that's kind of relevant to that discussion and interesting that Scott and I have just started to talk about. So again, no announcements here or anything like that, but we've been talking about the potential for a network automation certification track, right?
Oh, yeah.
To help people guide their learning. Because I think, at least for me, getting certifications for both from Cisco and from Juniper was really, really helpful in my career, just because when I was first starting out, I didn't know what to even learn. What did I not know? I didn't know. And so having that path of, okay, learn this, then learn this, then learn this, and this is how these things work, was helpful. And so creating that kind of learning path, maybe with certification tests along the way to prove that you've gone down this path, that might help with employment and recruiting people and things, is something we were toying with the idea of that. Now, the question becomes, I think, can we agree well enough on what those skills are to really lay this down? And is it too expansive in scope to build a test around, right? Like, I mean, there's definitely some challenges inherent there. And part of that is, I think that in most organizations, when we talk about kind of network automation, orchestration, observability, this whole net DevOps thing, it's not one person. It's a team. And so that creates a challenge for the certification as well, because if you're going to be, there probably needs to be somebody who just, is the lady who knows protocols really, really well, right? And then maybe there's the guy who knows the development side really well, and you put them on a team together, great. They don't necessarily both have to have exactly the same knowledge, which is interesting and challenging going forward.
I think it's also kind of nicer in a way. It allows you to use your personal traits to develop yourself, right? Before that, you have kind of network engineering to dig into. You have to know anything from IP address to routing protocol, right? Now you can kind of decide, are you going deeper or wider? Right? Describe there's kind of public cloud sort of thing, there's automation sort of things, and some people do one better than another, right? So,
and again, to the team approach that Chris mentioned, right?
Yeah.
It's Moneyball. Sorry, I overquote that movie, but it's like, I'm not trying to replace individual for individual. I need a collective set of skills. Can I create the right team mix? And in my career, 95% of the time, there's always been a way to help arrange the puzzle pieces to get what you need. It's that 10% that maybe I really need to hire somebody new. People want to learn. People want to progress. Certifications are huge motivators for many of us, myself included.
Yeah.
So I would just, the nuance I would add is we're not just toying with the idea anymore. What would scope look like? What are the boundaries? What makes sense? How do we do it with quality? We understand probably starting small is good. So maybe an introductory level, then an intermediate, then an advanced, probably something like that. But we don't want to go off down a road that is going to lead to excess controversy or poor ability to actually use. So those are the big questions we're thinking about right now. And we're talking to people in the community. If anybody who hears this wants to be part of that conversation, join our NAF Slack. Let's start talking about it. We need, it's just like how Chris and I started this. We're two guys, right? What is the attenuation against network automation adoption? Well, we have our opinions, but we need to get other opinions in the mix. So, there's usually wisdom in many heads, providing input and perspective on stuff like this.
Have you got a channel on Slack around certification? Or
Hi, Jeff. Excellent question. As always, yes, we do.
We should definitely include all the links, relevant information, URLs, everything as collateral of this podcast.
Yeah.
So people know where to go, where to find you, how to start, how to participate.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, probably the core piece of information is just network automation, all one word, .forum, where from NAF you can get all the blogs and all that sort of thing, and you'll get all the information on AutoCon's past and future, and that sort of thing. The Slack channel, it's up right over here on a different screen. It's just called Network Automation Forum, to nobody's surprise.
Yeah. And there is on that page you mentioned, Jeff, on networkautomation.forum, the main homepage, there is a button to join the Slack. There's a button that'll take you to the LinkedIn page. And then on pretty much every page, there's just a quick email, you just drop your email address in and get on the mailing list. If you want those updates as well, the more official updates.
Yeah. And there's actually some on the Slack channel. There is a lot of great discussions. If you're interested, speaking to the audience here, if you're interested at all in network automation, you'll find discussions that will fit your level of interest, whether you are a new person. Sorry, I'm starting to sound like a plug here, and I really don't.
It's okay.
I enjoy the channel. You'll find a bunch of friends there, but it's, it's just a community of interest at all sorts of different levels and on all sorts of different topics. And there are some terrific discussions there.
So I have a proposal. I think kind of between me and Jeff, we decided to take a little break from AI networking and, team discussions. Let's try to do crowdsourcing and see what should be discussed on the next meeting. I think we decided kind of to allocate more time to automation, and great that Chris and Scott are here. But let's make next meeting, I don't know, community driven. Let's see what bugs people, what they want to hear, and kind of build accordingly.
We absolutely love that kind of collaboration and input. And there actually is a super formal way for people to do that. Our call for presentations and for workshops will open up week of 6th January, right, Chris?
Yep. The first full week of the next year, yeah.
So that's how we get presentations on stage and pick workshop topics. So this is everybody's opportunity to, throw their idea in the hat, right? And I think you're talking about something also very complimentary, right? People who don't necessarily want to do a presentation or do all the work for presenting a workshop. But, while you introduce that idea, let's just make sure people know we're getting ready to accept, what do you want to see in Prague? Besides beautiful scenery and, wonderful eats. Yeah, exactly. That's been one of the very strong reasons people have, given 2 thumbs up for Prague. But
I missed the last IETF that was in Prague, and I've never been there before. So
it's amazing place.
It's definitely a big incentive for me to save my nickels and dimes and take a flight to Prague.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah. I want to make one more point. Awareness of your work. In ATF, we've got ANMAP, which is specifically focused on these topics. I cannot speak to the chair, so you probably know where to find Benoit. Let's ask them for 15 minutes update from you. You don't need to be in Thailand. You can do it remotely if time allows. I think creating awareness is a very important step to becoming better.
Oh, I think doing it in person is extremely important.
I mean, if you can come, next ATF is end of March in Bangkok, come over. And again, I cannot speak for chairs, and potentially I might not have time in routing to give you. Sometimes I do this, but it's natural for you to present an ATF because we are trying to solve the same problem pretty much.
Yeah,
we would welcome the opportunity.
Let's with enough chairs and see where we get.
Yeah, cool.
You said you had 2 things, Jeff. Was there one more you wanted to call out? Or did maybe I misheard you?
No, so I would like to kind of emphasize the idea of the crowdsourcing on next show.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jeff Doyle, where were you going next? Yeah.
Oh, well, I actually want to circle back around to something you said kind of back towards the beginning of the show, which is digital twins. You were saying some stuff about, digital twins and such, but I was in the same boat, as a consultant going back, 30 years of, when you are evaluating network change designs or whatever, and I would always emphasize you need to be testing these things in a lab before you deploy it in your live network. And, and the pushback was always, we don't have a lab to test this in. And so you end up cringing and pushing the button and hope it doesn't blow up your network. But, with the virtualization and all of that that's happening now, the idea of digital twinning, you're still not getting a physical replica of your running network, of your deployed network, but you're closer to something to where you can at least, verify what you're doing before you do it in a live network. And I guess where I'm going in all that, which is how much are you seeing out of discussions around network automation of AI as a factor in, the future of automation?
Yeah, quite a bit of interest for sure. I mean, as I think everyone who's probably listening to this, as well as all four of us, know, AI and through the release of LLMs recently has just become kind of very buzzy, we'll call it, right? So, AI is coming up everywhere. I do think there are some practical implications potentially for AI in networking. We did have at least 3 presentations at AutoCon 2 in Denver,
and a workshop
about AI and a workshop. Yeah, that's right. One of the workshops was on AI, and then 3 talks about the topic. One was more of a specific use case in AI ops, and then the other 2 were a little bit deeper dives into kind of just how to think about AI in general and how to use it and apply it for networking. And yes, so one of the things is, I think, as I think Scott mentioned earlier, a big part of our focus is around success stories, right? So the content at AutoCon is meant to be mostly and almost exclusively, real world experience being presented on stage, right? So I tried this in my network, it did work, and here's what I learned. Or, in some cases it didn't work, and here's what I learned. And sometimes those can be more valuable. And so I think we're probably on the lagging edge a little bit of AI, because it's just, I think it's right now, the people do have labs. It's in their labs. It's at their home labs. People are playing with it and messing with it. There are a few companies that are integrating it in some ways, right? A lot of times it's just right now, I say just, but it becomes a new interface into your data, where you have this kind of natural language interface into some of the tools now, which is pretty cool. But I think we're in early days. I think there is, some room there. To me, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but most of what we call AI, at least all the stuff that we talk about as AI now, is just automation.
Yeah.
So it may be more sophisticated automation, sure, but it's still just automation. And so to me, it's a natural fit. It's another tool in the tool belt potentially, right? Our LLMs and generative AI, are more tools there. And then there's this flip side, which we haven't talked about too much at NAF, which is, because there's AI for networking. Right. And there's also networking for AI. And so I almost always have to stop people when they start to talk to me about AI and networking and just define, wait, are we talking about building networks to facilitate AI workloads, or are we talking about using AI techniques to facilitate networking, right?
And I mean, that's a almost everyday discussion, internally where I work, and I'm sure it is where Jeff is too. But
let's talk about that.
I'm talking about almost exclusively that.
Yeah, I'm asking something different, but there's obviously all this excitement around AI data centers, because mainly because there's gigantic dollar signs around it, and certainly both those topics in my it's like okay, AI for networking, how do you design data center networks for AI data centers, and networking for AI, just how do you operate it? But I think I'm really asking a different question is, okay, all those tools are kind of out there being developed. You have AI tools, but how do they help you automate? How can we, adopt these tools? And, you talked about large language models, things like that, which is great, being able to just verbally, maybe at some point, ask questions, about your network and get an answer, as opposed to, querying telemetry and all that sort of thing. But I guess what I'm thinking,
ingesting that telemetry
exactly
at volume, and log messages and security log messages and other adjacencies to really get beyond human cognitive load limits, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to clearly kind of separate this two, right? One is just more convenient interface to interrupt. Think of your virtual tap, but you don't need to call your vendor, right?
Right.
You can ask question human language and ask
Yeah.
Like in very generic way and get proper answer, right?
Part of where I'm looking at with AI
I'm not using
machine...
Google for searching, am I right? For this reason. But this is, again, it provides convenience. It doesn't fundamentally change anything. The ability to predict what it's going to be, the ability to eventually act upon the prediction, I think this is where AI is going to eventually shine.
How about protocol like AI applied to bespoke scenarios? Like we have so much. I don't have to manually set up an MPLS connection. I have RSVP to do that for me, right? Setting it up manually, that's kind of gross and silly, and I would love to see
us. It's funny you say that, because there's this new thing called segment routing, and you get to set them all up manually every time.
I was trying so hard
on top of it, right?
I was trying so hard to not do that, to not do my usual dig on segment routing. But anyway, I want to take the opportunity to kind of take this and kind of go in both directions on this. To the tooling discussion, there's definitely more room for useful submissions for talks on how to make NetOps better using AI, whether it's ad hoc chat-based tools, AI embedded in vendor tools, the use of having access to more and more models, anything on Hugging Face that I can pull down and use. I would love more content on that. And from AutoCon 0 to 2, we've definitely seen an increase on the content. And, to the comment, Chris's comment on being on the lagging edge, we're seeing more things end up in production now. And those are the kinds of talks that come in via NAF. So what did Billy Idol say? More. We'd love to see more of that content. Yeah. And so, and I'm sorry, I'll try to make this no more pointed than I need it to be, Jeff Tansora. There's lots of interesting things happening in the realm of networking for GPU interconnect that I'm sure have great network automation scenarios and stories around it. Boy, we would love to see some of that. And even InfiniBand talks. Yeah. This is interesting. But network engineers want to learn. They want to see new stuff. And we have all the traditional IP network vendors participating and supporting this. I'd like to grow that with, the next really important company on that front. I'm trying to be so careful here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being so direct.
I see what you're doing here.
Yeah. So, and one offshoot of that. For a community that's very, very interested in and invested in open source, we really haven't seen much from the disaggregated networking and the open networking community. We're starting to see some folks with Sonic knowledge show up and start to participate. But it's not just Sonic, right? There are other NOSes out there that matter, that have automation stories with them. And I'll pick on, Hannes and RT Brick, or our friends at Arcus, or our friends at DriveNets, the Vios folks. I would love, again, we have a lot of people that are very open to open source. Seems like Sonic and those other NOSes could have much more representation and discussion within NAF. Sorry, that was my rant. I'm done.
And as of now, Sonic community mostly focus on Sonic and OCP events, right? Because of vendors and who is involved. I think
come visit us. Yeah,
I think it definitely involve more people, focus on Sonic. There's huge focus on automation because, for better or worse, Sonic has more deployments than the rest of the stuff together, right?
Yeah. And 2 years ago, I would have had a very different attitude on this. I think the service provider features that are making it into Sonic and making it much more broadly applicable. I've made my point. I rest my case.
Yeah.
So
all good points, and I think need to pay attention to. And again, it's going to be more outreach from your side than otherwise, right? Because
right.
So the awareness is the most important. People need to know you exist, you create value, and this is how you naturally create this network effect.
Yep. We appreciate that, Jeff.
Yeah. It's just out of what you said, we've actually had Keir Patel from Arcus on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember what the topic was now. But
BGP probably.
Yeah, but we've never had Hannes Gredler on. We should.
Hannes is an amazing person.
Please blame me explicitly. I would love to hear him talk about where he is with RT Brick.
Well, you just gave us an idea for a future
fascinating story. In general.
Yep.
Yeah.
10 years between him leaving Juniper and getting where he is now, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a very good point. So.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a mic drop?
Right.
My job here is done.
I could have sworn I heard a mic drop.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
it was one of those little tiny mics that all the influencers use now, though.
Yes, exactly. It weighs as much as my glasses, rag here. So
I think we are getting to the hour, so it's probably a good time to finalize today's meeting. I wanted to thank Scott and Chris, and we are not stopping on automation discussion here. We are just starting.
Absolutely, I think this was is a good kickoff for quite a few more shows here. And
there's no arm twisting required. I think Chris and I we love to talk about this. So anytime.
Absolutely.
Well,
this was a fun show. And I'm sorry, Chris, you started to say something.
No, all good. I was just thinking about the conversations about automation I was having 7 years ago versus today. And it definitely seems much. Maybe I'm just surrounded by different people, but it seems much more welcome these days.
You don't feel crazy anymore, right?
Yeah. I think for people in networking, going to something you said earlier, there's a lot less reaction these days of automation. Oh, that means I've got to learn Python, and this is a threat to my job.
Embrace it. You really need to embrace it. That's the message. And I've had to get through that myself, right? It's like, okay, my first project was with TCL and Expect in 1997 with Bay routers. Yep. And we can do more faster. And I hear more and more stories about companies that are having trouble bringing on new staff and new engineers with network engineering skills. This can be another way to help address some of the shortages that companies are actually dealing with.
Absolutely. And certifications can go a long way to, companies that are needing to hire expertise. That becomes a way for them to find it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. This is, like I said, this has been a fun conversation. This is really what this show has, is what we've always wanted out of this show, is just casual conversations that are informative, I hope, for our viewers. And this one certainly has been informative. It's been informative for me.
Very much so for me too.
This will absolutely not be the last time we'll be inviting you guys here.
We'll do our best to not give you a reason to not invite us.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you so much. Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Do something else. We'll see you next year.
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho.
Bye now.
Happy holidays.
Bye.